Y Media is a media company with 360-degree approach in reaching the audience over 8 media platforms. Television, Channel Y Canada, 24/7, available nationwide. Toronto, Ottawa.
Welcome to Y Media. Today we're here in Ottawa.
Vancouver.
Welcome to Y Media. We are at the Port of Vancouver.
Calgary.
Y Media Group is here live at the G7 Summit in Alberta.
Rogers 857. Bell 828. Telus 2418. Ignite 707. Channel Y USA now available on Dish Network. Sling. Channel Y USA now available across USA. New York. Miami. Washington, D.C. Chicago.
We are here at the 2025 Chicago Auto Show.
San Francisco. Los Angeles. Y Plus 24/7, English language channel available across North America. Radio Y 105.9 FM connects community on the go.
Listen to Radio Y 105.9 FM in cars, on Y Media TV app, Y.media website, and by calling 647-910-5000.
Congratulations to everyone at Y Media for the launch of your new radio station. Can't wait to come on one day.
Newspaper, midweek newspaper, the biggest free English newspaper in Canada. When print media is facing challenges across the globe, Midweek's continuous growth has positioned Midweek newspaper the biggest free English newspaper in Canada. Midweek covers international news, national news, sports news, entertainment news, lifestyle news, and more. Published every Tuesday. Delivered to 600 plus outlets. Y Media has multiple digital platforms to give you the latest news. Y.media and SouthAsianDaily.com. Y Media TV app. Y Media has app that connects you with all Y Media platforms around the globe. Y Media Awards. Y Media organizes many events every year, including the Y Media Awards.
Hello everyone, my name is Yudhit Jaswal. I'm the group editor at Y Media. A very warm welcome on Y Media once again. And today we are going to discuss live the US and Iran talks that happened in Pakistan. Islamabad, Pakistan, there's lots of action to be discussed. We'll take you a step back, why all this happened, why we are here, where we are right now, and we'll discuss all the details. What could happen next? We're also going to discuss that. Will this talks really pave the way for any sort of peace? Will the ceasefire last more than 2 weeks? There's lots to discuss, and we have our very own co-host at Y Media. You've been listening to her. She was born in Iran. She stayed in Iran, Canada, US, India, England. So she has lots of experience. Ramona ji, a warm welcome on Y Media. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on. It's great to be here and to talk about this very important topic that everyone's had their eyes on for the last 6 weeks. And it's a very consequential meeting today that's happening in Pakistan. So happy to be here and discuss all the details about this specific talks that are taking place.
Yeah, sure. And just for our viewers' benefit, we'd like to tell you, we are going to show you a graphic as well. I know there is a huge delegation from Iran, there is a huge delegation from US as well. But the core members, if you look at the core members, it's quite important, because after almost good 47 years, the US has such a strong delegation led by the Vice President himself, J.D. Vance. Jared Kushner is there, Steve Witkoff is there, US, and there were some security issues as well, so that they were discussing. But I think it's very important that US and Iran are having face-to-face discussions. This begs the question, let's take a step back. Because we definitely want to know why this happened. Why US agreed? Because there are many people saying, why US agreed for a ceasefire, these talks face-to-face, why Pakistan was picked as the mediator, why Iran agreed. So I'll give my viewpoints as well, but I want to listen from you as well. Your take.
Yeah, since the attacks that took place on February 28th, we just saw this entire war escalate. The attacks, they were in meetings like you're seeing today that they're in Pakistan, but prior to that, Oman was mediating the talks between the United States and Iran. And if you recall, there was a 12-day war last year,
yes,
which the United States essentially mediated the ceasefire between Israel and Iran. How that started was June 13th, when Israel decided to strike Iranian nuclear facilities as well as military operations, and then Iran retaliated, responded back with missiles, and there was interception of some of those missiles by the United States, and then there was that joint attack on what would have been a nuclear facility in where there's enriched uranium
yes,
in Iran.
Yes.
And then President Trump had, remember, said this was a big win because they got rid of Iran's enriched uranium, and then there's a ceasefire. The two parties, Israel and Iran, agreed last year, June 24th of 2025, there's going to be a ceasefire. So then from there was negotiations that were supposed to take place in terms of Iran and its enriched uranium. And as from my understanding, and Omani officials said that they were about to reach a deal. And then you had Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, who were representing the U.S. delegation. They go back to the president and say, no, Israel's going to go ahead and strike Iran, and if we don't strike also, then the retaliation from Iran to the U.S. will lose American soldiers and American people. So therefore we must go ahead with Israel and strike Iran. And that was February 28th. 2 days prior to that was the meeting that they had, which was on a Thursday. Everything sounding really good. Saturday the attacks happened, killing the Ayatollah and top regime officials. And a massive thing, and it was during the month of Ramadan. It sent shockwaves through Iran and the GCC countries and the rest of the world, to be frank. They were scheduled to have talks on the Monday, so this sneak attack that happened from Thursday, where great news, we're going to get somewhere, let's meet again, reconvene on Monday, but attacks happened on Saturday, which really changed everything. And when I saw those attacks take place on that Saturday, February 28th, I realized we've entered a whole new timeline. There's a massive shift what's going to happen in the geopolitical sphere of things, in terms of a superpower to nuclear, capable countries such as Israel and the United States, and the war that they launched on Iran. And knowing Iran and this Iranian regime, they will respond and they will go to the end. And, that's the usual case, but in this case, this was after the Ayatollah was assassinated and really crippling the entire regime, the hierarchy. And now here's the thing. Now this war escalated over what we saw 6 weeks, with many lives lost on both sides. And then Lebanon started coming into the factor of it, because then you had, as soon as the strikes happened and the Ayatollah was killed, then you had Hezbollah in Lebanon attack Israel, and then Israel decided to launch their occupation of southern Lebanon, essentially extending to the Litani River, which is 10% of Lebanon's land, and that has escalated. So now we come to this ceasefire agreement right before Donald Trump decides on Easter Sunday, which was a very holy weekend for the Christians in the world. There's over 2 billion Christians in the world. And this was also a holy weekend for the Jewish community because of Passover. President Trump goes on Truth Social and writes things, dropping the F-bomb, then continuing his rhetoric on ending a civilization to never be brought back. Just horrific things that you could just not imagine a president talk this way. No head of a nation has ever written these types of words or has said these types of words before. And then giving a deadline, because the deadline was pushed many times, giving the deadline on April 7th that if Iran doesn't open the Strait of Hormuz, which was a strategic thing for Iran in terms of retaliation to this war, they did not have control of the Strait of Hormuz, but it is at a choking point where Iran's land extends, as well as Oman, and they use that as leverage to make sure that the world supply doesn't get its oil. 20% of the world supply comes from that Strait of Hormuz, from the GCC countries as well as Iran. And so President Trump, even though he started this war on February 28th saying that he wants a regime change, the regime change changed to, open up the Strait of Hormuz. And so that, shifted, the goalposts changed a few times, the objectives of the war changed a few times, and then come 90 minutes before, the deadline of 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on April 7th, about roughly 90 minutes or so before then, you had Pakistan come in with this deal saying that, Iran doesn't want a 45-day ceasefire, which is what the U.S. was proposing. 45-day ceasefire, and then we'll continue talks. Iran was saying, no, we'd like to have this 10 points come across of ending the war. And we don't trust the ceasefire. We want to talk about ending this. These 10 points are critical, which we'll get into. And President Trump said he accepts it, and those 10 points are things that he could negotiate on. And then therefore, that was Tuesday, and then fast forward Friday, Saturday, the talks were supposed to begin. Vice President J.D. Vance, who's really hasn't been around for much of this war, is now part of the delegation from the United States to have these talks. He arrived this morning in Islamabad, and the talks have continued. So that's quite a bit of a summary of what's taken place so far.
Yeah, and now first things first, as you just described quite a few things, I must say this, that on the first day, Saturday, we're talking Saturday over here. On Saturday, the talks carried on for a much longer duration than anybody anticipated. Because earlier they were saying that on Saturday, the talks would happen, Saturday morning in Islamabad, Pakistan. So both the parties, both the delegations, we're seeing visuals of both the delegations. This is the delegation of Iran that we're seeing over here, their parliamentary speaker, their foreign affairs minister, Abbas Araghchi, he's also seen there, their parliamentary speaker, you can see over there. Then the US delegation also arrived early morning. You can see visuals of the US delegation, J.D. Vance. He's coming over there. So let me show you once again, when J.D. Vance arrived with his delegation, then there was a very interesting thing. When Iran's delegation arrived, Pakistan's Air Chief Marshal, he was in his combat dress. I'll show you a picture as well. That's very interesting. And hours later, when the US delegation arrived, instead of his combat dress, he was in a black suit welcoming, the US delegation. The optics do matter. It's more important what you wear, how your body language and everything else. So why the General Asim Munir was wearing a combat dress, and then hours later he was wearing a black suit to welcome the US delegation. So this is very interesting. If I can show a picture where you can see this, see this thing, that when the US delegation is arriving and when the Iranian delegation is arriving. Now, the talks were supposed to happen for an hour, 2-3 hours. And this is the picture that I was referring to earlier. There you see the Iranian delegation, General Asim Munir, he's wearing a combat dress. Of course, I've heard so many different medias interpreting their own way why he was wearing a combat dress, General Asim Munir, and to welcome the US delegation, he's in a black suit. Why a sudden change in just a matter of hours? But anyways, let's leave that for different interpretations. But here we are, the discussion started. Initially, what happened was that the discussions were happening in separate rooms. US delegation wasn't, just as they were happening in Oman. US was in a separate room and the Iranian delegation was in a separate room. Pakistan would carry the message, and then I think the deadlock was broken. And after that, we know there was dinner also in between the discussions. The discussions still kept carrying on late up until the night. And then the discussion started happening face to face. Now, let me take a step back as well. You've narrated how all these things unfolded, but there are certain things that still those beg a question. Why US agreed? I think for US, as we've already discussed this thing, I think Israel clearly made a great sales pitch to President Trump that yes, this is the weakest time. And from Israel, I've said this earlier, Mossad played a very active role. The Israeli intelligence, and especially the Israeli intelligence chief, David Bernau, it's being said he also went to US. Benjamin Netanyahu, we all know that yes, for many years, he wanted to do something about Iran. So President Trump, the information, I've read quite a few articles. At least I can quote 2 articles in New York Times itself. I've read articles in Washington Post, Wall Street. 2 articles in Washington, just in New York Times, and there are other articles in different media. They clearly state this, that the deep state was not very eager. Not many in the deep state were eager. They said, no, we shouldn't be attacking Iran. But President Trump, I think, because of the excellent sales pitch by Israel, President Trump said, okay, let's go ahead. And maybe they didn't anticipate many of the things. Number one, now the discussion, one of the important points is let's open the Strait of Hormuz. It was already open. So now the second part is Iran has shown a lot more resilience. It's almost 40 days. In this century, when was the last time we saw a 40-day war? I haven't seen a 40-day war other than Ukraine and Russia. And especially when US and Israel. Israel is the biggest superpower in Middle East. And then US is the biggest superpower on planet. 2 big superpowers, they go and attack Iran, but Iran has shown a lot of resilience. And actually, if you ask me why they came on the table from US side, we all know, we've talked this many times, US was looking for an off-ramp. They wanted to move out of this war as soon as possible because the economic losses that US is suffering, it's huge. Second point, you saw the inflation numbers that came out recently. President Trump has promised the inflation will go down, will make America great again, we're not going to start a war. So here he's started a war which he doesn't know how to end. Inflation numbers are high, oil prices are high, there's a lot of economic damage that has already been done. There is issue at the stock market as well. So all these issues combined together, and then the Strait of Hormuz, that has been blocked. So I think US was looking for off-ramp. They pushed Pakistan ahead, go ahead, talk to China because Pakistan has good relationship with China as well, talk to Iran as well. They're still in good talking terms with Iran, as much as they have a defense pact with Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia could be pressurizing Pakistan that, you know what, if push comes to shove, if there is an attack, you have to target Iran. That's what we've been giving you money all this time for. We didn't ask our money back. UAE has asked the money back, and it's a defense pact, and it's like NATO. It's like a small NATO there that if anybody attacks Saudi Arabia, you have to come to our rescue. But Pakistan thought, I have good talking terms with Iran, good relationship with China. They are on the right side of President Trump as well. So Pakistan was pushed forward to discuss all this. And I think I'll ask your viewpoint as well. As much as Iran is quite resilient, but Iran has also, seen this war, and Iran also feels exhausted now, because as much they still have some firepower, but President Trump was threatening while the talks were on one end. Both the president, I heard Masoud Pezeshkian from the Iranian president, they said we are winning the war. He praised those who went to Pakistan. But US President Donald Trump was also saying that yes, we have won the war, everything is good. So I want to ask from your side as well, what do you think? What do you think why US and Iran agreed on this ceasefire in first place? And secondly, why do you think Iran also agreed? Please go ahead.
When I was offering the summary, one big part that I didn't mention was that after the ceasefire was agreed on April 7th, one of the 10 points were that the attacks on Lebanon and the occupation of southern Lebanon has to stop. And then it did not stop. The next day you had about 100 missiles hit within 10 minutes, even going to Beirut. And then Iran decided not to open up the Strait of Hormuz. So even though the ceasefire was verbally said in terms of it's going to stop, what stopped was U.S. missiles going into Iran and Israel missiles going into Iran, but Israel did not stop with its war and occupation in Lebanon. And this was something that the Lebanese Prime Minister was asking for help the next day, saying this was supposed to be part of the ceasefire. The White House comes out and says, no, it's not. Lebanon is a separate thing. And then you had the same thing occur with Iran and its GCC neighbors, some missiles being sent that way as well. So, so even though, it's said to be a ceasefire, it wasn't a complete ceasefire, even though some elements were in place. Now you're saying, why did they agree to it? Because we can talk from all aspects of it. When we talk about President Trump, this is a president who's serving his second term and last term, only a year at the job, and he won his massive victory in the 2024 general election with J.D. Vance promising for America first. And, we've heard of the MAGA movement, Make America Great Again movement, which essentially were Americans that felt like, they're being forgotten by the elites in terms of, the money not coming back into investing back into the United States when it comes to their education, healthcare, infrastructure, everything else, making life more affordable, making the country more prosperous, bringing back certain, jobs that have been lost over the time in terms of industries. And Donald Trump was able to tap into that growing sentiment and really then brand it as MAGA. And he did promise. He said he's going to bring America first, and then he said his strategy for America first was to have tariffs and to try to make sure that America becomes a superpower again, in that sense of becoming competitive and bringing jobs back and all of those things and ending forever wars. This is something that they both campaigned on, Vice President J.D. Vance and President Donald Trump. So when you fast forward to having negotiations take place at the end of February, throughout February, and when the attacks happen, then you start hearing about why did he decide to do this, and then you hear the news come out that in the Situation Room he had a foreign leader such as Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel come to the Situation Room. And it's been claimed that President Trump didn't sit at the head of the table, which is where the president sits in a Situation Room, that he sat across Benjamin Netanyahu, who was in the Situation Room, essentially explaining to him that this is a time to take out the Iranian regime, that they can do this with what they did in Venezuela by taking out Maduro overnight and seizing the oil. This entire thing was played out to him. And then when he heard from his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, saying that, hey, Israel's going to attack anyway. I know we're, it's been said that there's going to be an agreement reached, but Israel's going to go ahead, meaning Israel does not really care about the negotiations that were taking place in February. That had their own agenda and they were going to pursue it. And what it also sounds like is that when Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, comes the next day, President Trump says the same thing, saying that Israel was going to attack, meaning they couldn't stop Israel while United States and Iran were in a negotiation, because essentially that would have been the key thing to do, stop your biggest, greatest ally, Israel, to not attack Iran and finish this negotiation. And then, President Trump's wanted to have, a peace prize, Nobel Peace Prize for so long. This would have been another thing that he would have negotiated. And for the longest time, we know that he's always talked very badly about the Obama deal with Iran back in 2015. And now there's speculation, is this new deal going to be worse than what Obama negotiated about, over 10 years ago? So you have that aspect of things. So then they decide that they're going to do it. They did. And, there's this whole thing about, this is going to be a regime change. He was telling the Iranian people who were protesting months prior to that, and massive assassinations took place of the Iranian people who were protesting. The Iranian regime says it's about 3,000 or so. Other humanitarian organizations say it's about 35,000 Iranians that were killed in that protest. So President Trump, joins Israel in the attacks on February 28th, saying that this is for a regime change and telling Iranians, stay in your home, and when we tell you, come out and, take over your country. Essentially what you saw January 6th on Capitol Hill, I guess, like that way of take over your country. So then, then after the Ayatollah was assassinated and high-level officials in the Iranian regime, it was very precise, their location. It must have, they had the intelligence to know exactly where they are, and they were killed on the spot. Then there was the school children, the girls that were killed, hundreds of them, and then there was other civilian locations that were getting bombed, and that started changing the narrative with the Iranians that were, the Iranians that don't live in Iran, who were also protesting all throughout the world, were very, happy when the Ayatollah was killed, but then they had Iranians in Iran that were pro-Ayatollah, and that was another thing for them, for him to be killed and assassinated. So it was just mixed feelings, I could say, from the Iranian community's perspective, one of shock on both sides. But then when things started escalating and they saw that, hey, wait a minute, civilian infrastructures are getting, damaged, and the level of destruction that's taking place in Iran has set Iran back, for so long, and, they're estimating it'll be trillions of dollars to be able to rebuild what this war has caused. But then you also have, the president saying, okay, well, we're going to choose the next Ayatollah. And then Iran being defined and choosing their own, which was Mojtaba Khamenei, the son of the late Ali Khamenei, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's son. And he, took over. And then you saw the people that, just went into the streets, and you saw this level of solidarity that you didn't expect in Iran, that you saw, a few weeks back, there were protests. So a lot of shifting things were taking place. And then when the Strait of Hormuz was closed off, which provides fertilizer, oil, 75% of oil from Japan comes from the Strait of Hormuz, 60% of India's and fertilizer comes from the Strait of Hormuz, China 40%. So all of the geopolitical regions started becoming impacted heavily, and that is when many, from even on the U.S. side, you had high officials quit, saying they cannot go ahead with this war because there was no evidence that Iran was a threat to the United States, because that was what it was sold, right? That it was Iran is an imminent and immediate nuclear threat to the United States and the world and Israel. And yet that could not be found, or it could not be claimed of any evidence of it. the late Ayatollah had agreed that there wasn't going to be any nuclear activity. Uranium was going to be enriched to a certain level and not more than that to have nuclear capabilities, which was part of the Obama deal. So now when you get rid of, all the people that were against, making Iran a nuclear capable country, such as the regime and the Ayatollah, you got rid of them. Now you have another faction of people that weren't part of those conversations, weren't part of those negotiations, such as the new Ayatollah, who lost his father, mother, wife, children, siblings in that initial attacks. He's yet to come live. He sent a few messages through Iranian state media, but then you had the American intelligence say, listen, the only way there's going to be a regime change is if there's boots on the ground military operation. And that was another thing that was, Iran is a mountainous country, it's got deserts. If you try to attack it from the Strait of Hormuz, from that seaway of the Persian Gulf, that's going to be mountainous, and then you have the desert, and that is something that is just a no-go. And then that's when you had, the fighter jets that were targeted and dropped, and then Iran had a bounty of 50,000 sterling pounds to find that pilot. So that was another question that was raised. That was that part of what the operation of getting the enriched uranium out of Iran, because then that the talks also changed. It was regime change, then let's get rid of the uranium, and then let's open up the Strait of Hormuz because oil has gone over $100 per barrel. It's having massive impact on the global economy. Stock market is going, down. It was escalatory for President Trump, and then him saying, well, I didn't know they were going to close the Strait of Hormuz. I didn't know. Really saying, I didn't know. I'm I'm the president of the world's greatest superpower, greatest economy, and the U.S. has been in the Middle East, having naval bases, having military bases in Saudi, UAE, Qatar, and so on and forth, to be able to protect our allies and to really make sure everybody plays well with each other and gets along and the economy is flowing. And then you had the head of this nation that has really built their reputation on being a superpower and controlling these relationships overseas, saying, I didn't know this was going to happen, and everybody knew this would have happened because it was something that was always the case for decades of what Iran said it would do. And this is why you had his predecessors not go into war the same way he did. So so then you're seeing like this level of lack of knowledge coming from the president, and then if followed by, we're having talks with Iran saying, no, we're not having any talks. And now it's come out that, for 3 weeks, the United States tried to have talks with Iran, and Iran wouldn't. Iran saying,
so Iran was saying no, the distrust.
Iran was not even responding.
Iran was not ready to do this talks.
Exactly, because Iran was saying, well, why should we have talks? If we were having talks, we were reaching an agreement with what you had wished for in terms of for us to be able to, because of the ceasefire we agreed on last year, June 24th in 2025, and since then we're having talks to agree on terms on nuclear capabilities, on enriching uranium and our stockpiles and how to play nice and all this stuff, and you bombed us. And you did it last year, and you did it again this year after a ceasefire, so we don't trust you, right? So, and then who's the guarantor for us to trust you?
Is it China this time? I think they're looking, you're right, I mean, one of the things that Iran is looking this time, they're looking for a guarantor, and seems like there cannot be any other guarantor. You rightly mentioned that, yes, twice as we were witnessing the talks were on, and right after the talks, you would see some sort of attack. So 48 hours prior to this attack on February 28th, there were discussions going on in Oman. So I think China could be one of the guarantors, but there is another aspect to this, that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he's clearly mentioned that our fight with Iran will carry on. As much as he's saying we could have a peace deal with Lebanon, which would act for generations, but Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he says there is a lot to be done. Of course, the network that Iran had built up, whether it was Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, and another, assortment of militias in Iraq as well. So all this, which Iran would usually mention as the axis of resistance, the forward defense, or whatever you want to call that. But I think one of the thorns in Israel's flesh was Hezbollah. Hamas, they were able to target after October 7th. Houthis, till a certain extent, Iraqi militias as well. But Hezbollah, I think Israel is mentioning we still have to take care of them. And there have been a lot of protests, and more than 2 people have died in Lebanon. There's a lot of chaos in Lebanon right now, a lot of civilian casualties in Lebanon right now. So one of the things that I've mentioned right from the start, that this is a fragile ceasefire. Will these talks, so let's address this question head on. Will these talks lead to some permanent ceasefire, or there will still be a deadlock? Please.
Yeah, and I want to raise a thing, right? Like,
sure.
Iran is a state sponsor of terrorist organizations throughout the Middle East, and that is their proxy wars in those areas. When 1979 came and the Islamic Revolution took place, immediately they acknowledged Palestine as a state, as an independent state, and so therefore you had, Hamas, you have Hezbollah, and you have the Houthis. But here's my question, right? We have to be able to agree to what terrorism is and apply it overall, right? We have to be able to apply what terrorism is and how it applies to every nation. And my question is this, right? No doubt you have these terrorist organizations that are causing havoc in the region. But when you look at what would happen, and this is a God forbid situation, okay? What would happen if, God forbid, you have in Canada Prime Minister Mark Carney and our cabinet ministers taken out by a foreign country, and we get bombed? Would we acknowledge that as a terrorist act of terrorism?
What you're saying, what we'll acknowledge as the act of terrorism?
God forbid, in a situation that that in Canada, we get bombed, and immediately takes out our Prime Minister, Mark Carney, our cabinet officials, and God forbid, I mean, this is a horrible thing to say. If this happens in Canada, Canada's in negotiations with another country to agree on, a very serious situation, and we get bombed. And we lose our Prime Minister, we lose our high cabinet.
Bombed by who?
By a foreign country.
By a foreign country?
By a foreign country, right? Would we consider that an act of terrorism?
That will be considered as an act of war. There is a difference between, I think so. Again, everyone has their own definition of terrorism. For one country, a person could be a martyr. For someone else, that person could be a terrorist. So it depends upon whom you're asking. But the situation that you're describing, God forbid that happened, you're right, it's a terrible thing to say. But if that was the case, I'll consider that as an act of war. That'll be considered as act
right. It's an act of terrorism that would trigger a war.
Yeah.
Right. A terrorism is war. Right. This is and that was my question. When my first protest was actually when I was a student at Carleton University, and we had President Bush come to visit Parliament Hill, and this is when he had his war in Iraq, because of what we saw take place with the Twin Towers and 9/11. And we had a massive protest in Ottawa, and we walked from a long way and through the bridge, because he was going to be in Gatineau, and over to the Quebec area. And I remember seeing like hundreds and hundreds, and it appeared that there was like almost 1,000 of us, because there was the whole thing of like, the United States had back then gone into Iraq because of weapons of mass destruction, which was never found, and then that war continued for the better half of that decade. So when you talk about terrorism, which we're all against, because none of us want wars, and none of us, want to have terrorist organizations within our country causing harm to civilian population and our infrastructure and everything else, and for our safety and security. But we have to also be able to, apply every situation to every country and keep, applying it as a standard thing, not just like, oh, they do it and we don't do it, and they're called this and we're not called this. And I think we need to be able to acknowledge that to have these very serious conversations, we need to be able to use logic. And this doesn't mean you're defending one side over another side. This isn't like a woke situation, conversation where you're not allowed to say certain things. You should have dialogue and say, if this happened to us, what would it mean? And how would it escalate? And so I think that's important to identify. And then there's this whole aspect of what's taking place in Lebanon. What you're seeing is the United States and Israel, the two leaders, Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump, who are very close. They've spent, I think there's been like 8 trips between the two of them since President Trump got back into the White House. And they're very close, but you're seeing that Israel will do what it needs to do. And they go on their own state media and say their objectives need to be met. And, for them, it's southern Lebanon and what they needed to do and what they did in Gaza. There seems to be a difference in terms of the two of them. In terms of being on the same page all the time. And even President Trump, when he was saying before the ceasefire, was saying he's talking to high official in Iran, but wouldn't name who that is, because he said otherwise we're afraid he's going to get assassinated, knowing that, when they had a high-ranking general who was going to do the peace talks again and negotiate, that person was killed by Israeli forces too. So it's very like Israel seems to, and after this 10 points that Iran put forward, and President Trump said that he's going to, it's workable, it was his words, Israel continued to bomb Lebanon, which was part of those 10 points to have the ceasefire. So what worries me is, going to your question on, will the ceasefire stay and will they reach to some sort of an agreement terms? It's unknown, because Israel has its own agenda and has always said it's going to pursue its agenda. What that may be, we'd like to hear what that is. But and it looks like the United States cannot control Israel in this sense. Even though they're the greatest allies and that's what they call each other, it seems like it doesn't have full control of what they want to do.
Yeah, you're right. As much as I would agree to this, that Israel doesn't have, US doesn't have full control of Israel, but as I've already mentioned, that Israel has some sort of influence. Their lobbying is very strong. The US and Israel has very strong ties, but US also has some sort of leverage with Israel. I wasn't surprised the moment US mentioned, okay, fine, it's a ceasefire. At least in Iran's case, Israel declared that yes, it'll be a ceasefire in Iran. Of course, it carried on its agenda in Lebanon, and you're right. Israel and US, they have different agendas. No two countries could have the same foreign policies. That is true. But you know what? One of the challenges that Israel is facing right now, and that is not being talked too much in media. I was reading an article which clearly said this in that article, that the ballistic missiles which Iran is using to target Israel right now. So not many of those ballistic missiles by Iran are being intercepted by Israel. So Israel's, we can call it an Iron Dome or missile defense system, it's strong, but at the end of the day, Iran's missile defense system can only do so much. So it's also getting exhausted. And Israel, I think, realizes this thing, that it has a narrow window. And the moment, like US says, because US has too much to lose. President Trump has to, there are so many things happening. First things first, he's going to visit China on 14th and 15th of May. So that's a very important thing. He doesn't want to be, focusing on this war. So he wants to focus on his China tour, President Trump, number one. And he'll have to answer otherwise things on war. Number two, the inflation numbers are high. Number three, the oil prices are high. Stock market is up. In June, you have the Soccer World Cup. Then there is 4th of July, 250th anniversary of independence of US. So after July, you have Other than that, you have the G7 summit in France, then you have the G20 summit in Miami, and then you have the midterms. So I'm just picking on few things. There's too much on the agenda. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, but that's my question is exactly that. If Israel doesn't stop its occupation of southern Lebanon, this whole thing will continue. This is the critical thing. Israel has its plan for the greater Israel. They talk about it. This is not something the media has made
it's
up.
Open. It's
an open thing.
It's an open thing.
So
and they're almost halfway through in creating greater Israel. You could agree with this. They're almost halfway through. In Gaza, they've done that sort of thing. In southern Lebanon, they're doing this. In Syria also, and in West Bank. So they're almost halfway through in creating greater Israel. Please.
You have a million Lebanese people who are displaced. They cannot go back, and they're saying, you leave this area, you can't come back because now it's going to be Israel territory. This is occupation we're talking about. So can the United States, so far we haven't seen them. They said, Lebanon's not part of it. Iran cannot make a deal. And I'm talking about, I want people to understand, when we talk about this, we're not defending one country over another country. We're talking about the geopolitical aspects of things that you must take into consideration to have a very intelligent conversation about possible outcomes. Okay, so this is very mindful. So this is not defending one, this isn't playing sides, it's none of that. You have to be able to talk about things in a very open and transparent manner to understand the psyche of the individuals who are running countries. We're not talking about an entire nation. We're not talking about a religion. We're talking about what is the psyche of these world leaders. What is the psyche of President Trump? What is he likely to do? What is he not likely to do? What is that for the Prime Minister of Israel and as well as this Ayatollah, this brand new Ayatollah in Iran? What is the psyche? And then understanding also the people who are at these talks, such as Jared Kushner, where are his actual financial interests? Why did he give advice like this to his father-in-law to go to war, knowing that fully well this isn't going to play out? And I think if President Trump had a crystal ball where he could see what would have been the outcome of this war, maybe he wouldn't have started, even though many people told him. You mentioned the Israeli lobby. That is true. AIPAC is the only lobby that is a foreign lobby that's not registered as a lobby. We have rules in the Western world for lobbying. If you're going to lobby the government on behalf of an organization or an industry and you're a lobbyist, you have to register. And if you don't, there's some severe issues with that and penalties, and there's laws around that. So when you have majority, and now there's campaigns, there's websites about which U.S. politician has taken money from AIPAC and what is their agenda, where are their loyalties? Is it America first, or is it Israel first? This is not about taking sides. This is just talking about what is happening in the United States and what is the conversation there and what is happening when it comes to these midterms and elections. So let's take that into consideration. Then you have, so the question being is, since Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran, it cannot abandon what is going to happen, what is taking place in southern Lebanon. So unless President Trump is able to talk to the Israeli Prime Minister to say, hey, maybe you should abandon your plans of taking over southern Lebanon as occupation, then I think we could get to some sort of an agreement. Mind you, the 10 points that Iran has put forward are very maximalist, which we should talk about if the United States would ever agree to them and what that means. And then I also want to talk about China. What is China's role in all of this? Really, China has been the secret superpower in all of this. There's been reports that China's already sending a ship of weapons to Iran while these talks are taking place. We know that China provided parts and components of the missiles. So you had, Iran using drones that was taking out desalination plants in the Middle East, targeting, and those were like drones which they, can produce so many, having a stockpile of about 80,000. It's estimated they cost anywhere from like $10,000 to $50,000 to produce. And then you have the American interventions of these missiles, it's cost them about $1 million to use. American weaponry is very expensive. It's estimated that this war cost $1 billion a day for America. Of course, we're going to know the numbers later on. We know that Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, asked for another $200 billion to be able to fund this war. We've heard that there's going to be a draft that was put in place, turned into law, that eligible people in the United States will go into an automatic draft that is preparing for wartime. When you see the numbers of how much they've invested in weapons for wartime. So all those things are there. And then you have this massive escalation that's taking place, and no one around in the Trump orbit is telling him, hey, he wasn't listening to the people that told him these things can happen. So the question remains, and now the latest talking point is, will Trump do a worse deal than Obama? And does he have any influence in what Israel plans on doing? And so it's very shaky grounds. But when it comes back to China, you had China that provided intelligence when it comes to radar and to know where the American forces are, Israeli forces are. You have them also purchasing Iranian oil almost at a discount when the Strait of Hormuz was closed. And so you had the intelligence provided by the Chinese, you had components of your missiles provided by the Chinese, you had revenue coming in from the Chinese, which they do take 40% of the oil from that area. So there's that aspect as well. And then we know that China is an ally of Pakistan, and Pakistan was the in-between facilitator of negotiations, and that's why they're Pakistan. So we know that China's a big player, and now while the United States spent, if it's a 40-day war, and we estimate about $40 billion were spent on this war, that it doesn't look like, the United States was a winner of when it comes to our economy, public consensus, what MAGA wanted, what MAGA didn't want, what the Democrats now, there's articles of impeachment for President Trump. There's all kinds of things that are taking place for the president in a midterm year. And mind you, on top of that, the seat that Mar-a-Lago is in that district, it got flipped to Democrats. So that was a safe Republican seat that was flipped to Democrats. So that's happened in his home base, where Mar-a-Lago is in Florida. So you have that aspect of things playing out. And so now and then China didn't spend, a penny in terms of losing billions of dollars for a war. And at the same time, this is something that we saw, the trade war between the two countries, where the United States wants to become a mass manufacturer of semiconductors, chips, for this AI revolution, that he relies on the money from the GCC countries to go back into the United States, from Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, all the money that would go back in. And those countries were bombed by Iran, even though they were supposed to be protected by the United States, which is why they had those military bases there anyway. So you have, and then everyone's watching that, US will support Israel
other nations, I think the number is around 71. So that they have a massive delegation. But you just mentioned, I think the major is the mistrust. I mean, the mistrust, even before these talks started, the mistrust has been a major. So they will definitely need a current. Of course, we'll get a discussion. These are the points that we agreed. These are the points that we did not agree upon. Lebanon, of course, that's a same point for sure. Because Iran would not want to leave Lebanon like that, especially because of Hezbollah. So the funding, maybe it's 100 million or 200, or sometimes, it's anybody guess, around 100 to 300 million dollars. That's what Iran spends almost on an annual basis to support all these proxies and an assortment of all these militias in different areas. So I think, yes, that part will be taken care, and you rightly said so earlier that Israel has its own objectives. If there is one party other than China, Iran, US, Pakistan, even India wants this to settle down, that party is Israel. Israel wants this war to carry on. And while there were late night discussions, Saturday late night discussions happening in Pakistan, it was very late in Pakistan. We're also going to show you some visuals of that hotel where all this was happening earlier as well. But late night discussions in Pakistan, and here comes Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that we will carry on our war against Iran. They're not talking Lebanon over here. So Israel clearly states our war against Iran will carry on, because he's again alleging that, yes, because of the terror export that they do. And you're right, I think most of us would agree that Iran has backed all these terror outfits, all these outfits in Iraq, in Lebanon, Hezbollah, Hamas, and Houthis as well. Another aspect which is not being discussed that much, it has been discussed. How much damage do you think overall? We've heard in bits and pieces. Qatar had a damage of, they're saying maybe 15 to 20 billion in that one particular LNG site. Iran's, you said that China is sending more weaponry, but they've provided a logistic support as well. That's why Iran is being able to hit so precisely. So what I was talking is, not much has been discussed. How much is the total damage to the energy infrastructure? That is another aspect why, as much as Saudi Arabia, Dubai, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, they want once and for all Iran to be decimated, weakened. Even if there is chaos, they don't care. But one thing which I think would be discussed in the backroom channels, that all these countries, their energy infrastructure has taken a big hit. Strait of Hormuz will open. So what? I mean, it will take billions of dollars and a few years minimum, as much for all these countries to finally get back to where they were initially with their energy infrastructure. Whether it's Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Bahrain, the LNG plant itself will cost billions of dollars. And Iran also knows this. Iran also knows this, that yes, our energy infrastructure, our economic infrastructure has been crippled, as much as President Trump claimed while the talks were on. Here, the talks were on late night. President Trump is claiming their military, has been negated. They don't have much of Air Force or Navy left. Everything is gone. So Iran, we are winning the war. That's what President Trump. Of course, Iran was also claiming that, and it will take, I would say, billions of dollars and many years. So when Iran came to these talks, Iran was clear in its mind that they will definitely want to have some sort of role in Strait of Hormuz. Iran is looking for a massive compensation. A massive compensation. We know more than 3,000 people have died already. Another 2,000 dead in Lebanon as well. And there are people who've died in other parts of the Gulf as well. But Iran says, the way you have attacked us and the way you have bombed our infrastructure, they are looking for some sort of compensation. I doubt US would agree to a direct compensation. So what sort of compensation are they looking for? Strait of Hormuz. Some sort of toll, as much as they know that yes, those waters they share with Oman as well. But that will be another aspect, how much for that aspect US will agree. US is claiming they have set their own red line. Their red lines are no uranium enrichment. Why would Why would Iran agree to that? That's what Iranians are claiming right now. As much as we don't want more nuclear weapons. And if I can once again step back a bit, what has US achieved out of all this? One thing for sure, I think the single status, that US enjoyed, that we are the only sole superpower, that status that US enjoyed, with due respect I'm saying, and I've been saying this from 2018, 2020, 2022, and now I'll say that once again, that status has been on a decline. And I won't say this was the last straw on the camel's back, but definitely this has triggered even faster. Maybe it has, the decline has been even faster. In this century, if you would ask, there'll be definitely a debate. What was the biggest mistake of this century by US? Was it the Iraq war or was it the Iran war? We can always keep on weighing our options. As far as losing so much influence is concerned, as far as losing the status of a sole superpower, I think Iran war, by the time dust settles down, Iran war, I think will be talked more in the history books than Iraq war. Of course, I'm not taking away anything from the Iraq war, massive casualties over there. The numbers vary, maybe 500,000, some people say, but I think most likely 1 million lives lost there. But here we are. But still, US was still a superpower. Beijing Olympics 2008, when Bush went over there, they said, oh, USSR is gone. Are you sure you guys would be able to do the Olympics? I mean, China, when it came in as an economic power, it came in as a technological power, their infrastructure, hosting Olympics and all that. Yes, that was a discussion of this century. But then, even after Iraq war, the sole superpower was US. I think that'll be a big discussion when the dust settles down. Please.
If one of the aspects of reparations are for Iran to then formalize its control over the Strait of Hormuz, it's going to be very devastating for the countries that are not at the table that it's going to affect. It's going to affect, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, you have Bahrain, you have, and then Oman has the final tip, but Iran is the country that covers all of that land on the north of that Gulf and then of that streamway, and you have all those other countries that have had United States military that's made them into a target by the Iranian regime because they're essentially saying we are supporting a Western influence here, right? This is not very popular in the Middle East to then really become westernized and have westernized influence, which those countries then, sell their oil and then use the United States dollar, USD to trade, and then they heavily buy US treasuries, US debt, and that money goes towards investing into the US economy, this AI boom, all that's coming from that region. So for Iran to then control their output, because Saudi Arabia, their output production went down 20%, and their output in terms of selling their oil dropped 50% in that time. So they're going to be sitting there thinking, Iran never owned this waterway. This was a shared waterway because of our geography. Mm-hmm. And now the United States, who was supposed to protect us, which is why we allowed their military base here, we got bombed because we had the military, because the bombs that came from Iran was to attack all the US military installations in those countries. So not only we got these bases and we agreed on how we're going to buy and sell in USD, why not in our own currency? It's our oil. They could set the terms on their own currency. Yes. But we're using, USD. We are buying your debt. We know that the U.S. economy cannot sustain itself with the amount of debt. Like, we're talking about trillions. And so it manages it through some of these ways, right? With Japan buying its debt, with those GCC countries funding the United States, and all those initiatives. We know that Jared Kushner did a deal after his first term in the White House with his father-in-law. He went to Saudi Arabia, used all those relationships, and started a investment fund of $2 billion. Which then he went and invested in Israel and has become a power broker, which is why he's sitting in those meetings, because he's a power broker after spending, the first term in the White House for President Trump. You thought that he was supposed to be there for the American taxpayers, but no, he's there right now as a power broker because he has access to those funds and he manages those funds. So you have that question of now you're allowing Iran, who has been, a critical point, which is why we allowed you guys to come here to protect us from Iran. We got bombed from Iran. You didn't protect us. You sided with Israel. And now you're going to give our ways that we have revenues in our countries through the Strait of Hormuz, and you're going to let Iran control their capabilities of production and shipment. I mean, this is this is not a small thing that it's unheard of. And that would be very devastating to those relationships. I can't even begin to describe the level of fallout there would be for that.
I also wanted to ask your opinion. There's another aspect, and I know you would be able to answer that. You lived in California.
Yeah.
Gavin Newsom, the governor. We're talking 2028 here now.
Right.
Of course, the governor is touted as someone who could be the Democrat candidate.
Right.
And here is J.D. Vance, who's been projected as the Republican candidate. So we could see a face-off in 2028. Some of the polls have projected them close in case they both have a face-off in 2028. And here is J.D. Vance.
Yeah.
I watched his documentary on Netflix. I've seen what he did. He's written a book, and I've been following J.D. Vance, how he was there in college, in university, how he married Usha Vance, then how did he rise to this position, and of course he has a mission. Up until now, he's faced many challenges. We've seen that in that documentary. We've seen all that. But I think this is the biggest challenge, how he comes out of all these negotiations. Because now, US President Trump, to the New York Post, he says J.D. Vance is not going. He said that. But here he has, now J.D. Vance, there are so many others, some of them, like the National Security Advisor or the expert on Asian affairs, they're all there. You just spoke about Jared Kushner. You just spoke about Steve Witkoff. But I think the front face of this entire delegation, or even the core delegation, is J.D. Vance. So how he does in these negotiations, I think this is the toughest challenge of his political career. Please.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why he hid for the last 6 weeks. He was nowhere. Mm-hmm. He wasn't. You just had Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, and Pete Hegseth, Secretary of War, there, and President Trump. Those were the three people you saw throughout this war. There was no J.D. Vance anywhere, and then he ended up in Hungary to go and promote the election that's taking place there. And I think that's foreign interference. I think if we have an election here in Canada, the last thing we want is another, sitting vice president or prime minister to show up and campaign for one side. So I don't understand what that was. Him showing, I'm not just away from the media and on no talking points on this. I'm actually campaigning, in Hungary for their war. That's on its own, and that is foreign interference. But yeah, this is his now ability to now come out of this to be the person who was able to come to terms with Iran, do a deal that could stick, that has guarantors for Iran as well as the United States on the measures that they're asking for. But then the question begs: does Vice President J.D. Vance have control of Bibi Netanyahu? Does he have any control over Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? I don't think so. And it looks like President Trump doesn't even have that. So again, we got to go back to the psyche of the people who are in charge of these countries that are in play here. And that's the state of things. So I don't know how long it'll hold. I mean, I hope that ideal case scenario would be they come out of these talks and they come to terms, some sort of terms. But if Iran gets what it wants to, it is going to be very devastating for the United States, for what it means for the region. So if J.D. Vance is at the helm of talks where Iran gets to then be in charge of the Strait of Hormuz and charge $2 million for ships to pass through, then it would go down in the records that J.D. Vance was responsible for the GCC countries not having access to their own production and shipments of their own oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Now Iran is in charge, and therefore they will say, you know what, get rid of these military bases. So is J.D. Vance really going to be the one who's going to lose the petrodollar in the region, because they could then change the currency, because then the United States is no longer a presence and influence there? Is J.D. Vance going to be the person who's going to be in charge of saying, okay, you know, now you guys can be a nuclear power because you want to enrich your uranium as a guarantor? So yeah, no other country can be a guarantor, of course. China can't be a guarantor if there's going to be a war between Israel and Iran, but the guarantor would be Iran saying, okay, well, we're going to be also a nuclear nation like Israel, and if Israel is going to continue its war and it's a nuclear nation, then so are we. And then also the rhetoric of with President Trump saying, I'm going to end a civilization to never come back in. That's talking about nuclear capabilities. How else would you kill an entire civilization in one night? Like how else? That you're speaking nuclear. So you have that. So this is also tricky for J.D. Vance, because no matter what the outcome will be, we know he can't control Benjamin Netanyahu. We know he can't. We know that if he does a deal agreeing to Iran's terms, then he's going to sever the relationship with those GCC countries, which also means the petrodollar, which also means the funding in U.S. treasuries. It also means how much all of that comes out of the GCC countries. Although those countries are wealthy because of oil. Now Iran is saying, I'm going to control your oil production and your oil shipments. So what does that mean for the economies of those countries that are still trying to develop? It's kind of, you know, a bad situation to be in, and for anyone. I mean, we knew what happened to Mike Pence. Really, like, what happened to Mike Pence's career? What happened to the people who were around this president in their first term? What happened to Rudy Giuliani? What happened to all those people? So when J.D. Vance decided he's going to run as the vice president for President Trump, you know, it would have been known that usually people's careers don't fare well when they leave the White House serving this president, because the rest of those people from the first term didn't fare well. And so what does it mean for Marco Rubio, who was trying to run for president in 2028? J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio were going to be going head to head for that nomination. And now at this war shows that Marco Rubio is all about war and cannot control Israel, because the next day he said Israel was going to bomb and we had to go and do it as well. Not saying, well, Israel was going to bomb, but we talked them not to, and we're going to have this deal complete with Iran. That is what is expected of a Secretary of State, not, you know, him in a stressful manner explaining that they just had to follow Israel into this war. So, you know, massive differences here of what that means for 2028. Gavin Newsom, you brought up, well, he's not that popular, but and hopefully he's not going to be the Democratic candidate, because I mean, when you look at it, had Biden, then had Kamala, and then Gavin Newsom, which has really, you know, you talk to any Californian, they'll say that under Gavin Newsom things have become harder, more expensive. He came up with the law of any theft under $900, you don't have to get charged. So you know what happened when you walk into like CVS or Rite Aid or any of those places, all of or Target, their goods like deodorant, shampoo, razors, they're all behind glass cases that you cannot get unless you get somebody, an attendant, to open up the glass case for you to buy basic, these basic items from these places because of theft. They're all under $900. So what he's done in that state, which is one of the most wealthiest states in the United States, with a great economy, I don't think he's going to fare well. So the Democrats right now are in a position to be able to really take some more seats. It's going to be very interesting to watch what happens with this midterms coming up, because, President Trump, part of his popularity when he was making a comeback, because you can imagine he was gone for 4 years, he had all those lawsuits he had to deal with, he had all those cases, those criminal cases, everything going on with him, not looking like he was going to have much support. You had Ron DeSantis, who seemed like he was going to become the candidate for the Republican Party. He's the governor of Florida. And then all of a sudden that shift that happened after that execution plan on President Trump when he was at that rally. And that's another thing. He never opened up the files there to find out what happened to him, who was behind that shooting. That's for another conversation to be had. But here you have, him making a massive comeback, and part of that was he went on Joe Rogan. He went, on all of these podcasts. Megyn Kelly, she campaigned for him. You had Tucker Carlson. You had the rest of them. And now these are the same people who are now saying, Sir, President, sir, we told you since last year in that 12-day war, this is not something that should continue with Iran. And now they're going against him. And then President Trump went and tweeted about how they're all low IQ. So there's fractures in when it comes to the conservative base, because these influential personalities, these podcasts have millions of views, millions of followers. They have their own way. And when it comes to the political world, they really called it a podcast election. And this is why Kamala Harris regrets not going on Joe Rogan. So when you have now the people that actually helped him reach, because it wasn't mainstream media. Now the new medium is podcasts. It's online. You go on YouTube, you go on Spotify, you go on Apple Podcast. This is where they live. And of course on YouTube, it's accessible, it's reaching. That's why President Trump had the biggest young voters for the Republican Party in history, because they're sitting on these platforms listening to these podcasts. And now all those guys are against him for this war, because none of them can figure out why he went into it to begin with. And in the end of it, he doesn't look as strong and as powerful when he is not, able to have Israel under control, which could sideline these peace talks anyway. And so for your question for J.D. Vance, I think this is going to be very difficult. The outcome of it can go any way, could be spun any way for when it comes to GCC countries, when it comes to Iran, when it comes to their economy. It could go in many, many different ways, even if we do see end of war talks take place.
Yeah, these are some very important points that you just made, And among all this, I also wanted to mention this, that U.S. is saying, I heard Lindsay Lohan, and so many others, they're still mentioning that, yes, if this doesn't go any further, so they are saying something terrible could happen. And some of the terrible things that they're mentioning, I don't even want to repeat that. But Iran was already wary of that, and Iran has already been alleging that there's a lot of mistrust over here. But let's see how it goes. And among all these things, I think Pakistan certainly has a shining moment, because as much as we could agree or disagree, but Pakistan was branded as where Osama bin Laden was found. It has its economic issues still carrying on. There's so many other host of issues. It's a hybrid democracy. So many other things could carry on. But here is Pakistan right at the heart where a very important diplomatic efforts are on. So Pakistan is trying to change its brand. Will this help or won't? There are also news that Pakistan's, some of its Air Force, action is seen in Saudi Arabia. Has Pakistan sent some of its fighter jets to Saudi Arabia? A couple of media reports are indicating that, but Pakistan hasn't confirmed any of that. Saudi Arabia, as we speak, hasn't confirmed any of that. But we all know, yes, there is a defense deal over there. So this is a big question that as Pakistan is facilitating, the talks between Iran and US, why this is the timing is very, very important in this area. Also, on Saturday, as the Liberals gather together in Montreal, the convention is there. We heard the Prime Minister's talk. Of course, many other leaders did talk on stage as well. But at the Montreal Convention, one of the things, I'll talk about foreign policy since we're talking more about that. Prime Minister Mark Carney said, gone are the days when we would send 70 cents of a dollar to US in the defense spending. And he got a standing ovation for that. I'll just have a listen at this visual. So we will carry on lots of discussion at Y Media Political Sensex for you, whatever is happening in Montreal. Our colleague Shubi is there. Shubi has interviewed Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne over there. Shubi has interviewed Evan Solman and a host of other cabinet ministers, including Ruby Sohotas, many member parliaments as well. So he is there at the Liberal Convention in Montreal. But we'll listen from him shortly as well. But what do you make of this? The convention that's happening in Montreal, Liberal Convention.
Well, I think what's taken all the oxygen in the room and the headlines has been his latest Conservative MP that crossed the floor to become a Liberal MP, Marilyn Gladu, which is Southern Ontario MP. This is, I think, that's been, it happened, a day before the convention started, or maybe 2 days before the convention started. And, it's a big deal because this is the Prime Minister who's been there for a little over a year, and he already had 5 MPs cross the floor. And he's only 1 seat shy away from a majority. 171 is his now latest count. And he needs 172 to get what he needs to become majority. And we know there's 3 by-elections that are happening on Monday. So a Monday night is election night. It's 2 seats in Toronto area and the University of Rosedale, replacing Krista Freeland, who left, and Bill Blair, who left his seat in Scarborough Southwest. So those 2 seats are up. So we know those were Liberal seats. Will they hold as Liberal seats? It's probably likely. And Montreal area seat, which is now, there's the only contention there is, will the Blocs get that seat? It was a Liberal seat. So we'll see what happens there. But, he needs 1 seat and there's still 3 left. At the same time, you have, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre saying, saying essentially if an MP goes into an election with one party and then decides to cross the floor, and after they get elected for that party, then they should step down and be recalled essentially, and there should be a by-election. And it's interesting because Marilyn Gladu was supporting that in January, and what happened is you have in November, you had the first Conservative MP from Nova Scotia across the floor. Then in December, you had, Michael Ma in Markham Unionville, Conservative MP, first term, across the floor. In January, nothing happened. But in February, you had another MP cross the floor. Then in March, I think that's when he had his NDP MP from Nunavut cross the floor, from NDP to Liberal. And then in April, you had this latest Conservative MP cross the floor. So, it's almost like every other month, every month except January, he's had an MP that's crossed the floor. There's talks that they're still talking to like 9-10 other MPs from other parties to cross the floor. So this is something that is unheard of, unseen. But at the same time, it came out yesterday that, we know this Prime Minister has been, 2 things he's done. when he's in the home front, he's attracting MPs across the floor. And when he's traveling, he had 28 flights across the world in the last year trying to do trade agreements because of the massive tariffs by President Trump. He went to China, he went to India, he went to Japan, he went to Australia. He's gone over to the United Kingdom many times. He's traveled to the European Union with NATO allies. And then the latest number that came out is that, like, this is very shocking, and I don't know how to comprehend these numbers, and we have the exact numbers that we can pull up, but we're talking about a little over $500,000 that was spent on in-flight food. So that's 28 trips, and if you were to do the math, that averages out to a little under $18,000 per flight that was spent on just food. And so it begs the question, at a time when you're trying to save the Canadian economy from losing or having, one of its biggest trading partners, such as the United States, saying it's going to, decimate the auto industry, it's going to decimate the lumber, the steel industry, and everything else that Canada relies on this very key partnership with, and you decide you're going to have trade agreements with other countries that, growing at a fast rate, such as India, and you can't ignore China. Just those two countries alone, you're tapping into, just shy of 3 billion people. And so you decide that you're going to do these trips for the Canadian people, but charge the taxpayers about $500,000 on food on flight. We don't know the numbers on what was spent on these when he landed. So this is just food in the air, not food on land. And I just don't know, when reports, 2026 reports on it, the average Canadian spends about $17,000. This is average Canadian family of 4 people spend about $17,000 on grocery bill a year, right? This is just the average, right? And then so $500,000 would be 30 years of the grocery bill for an average family of 4 people in Canada. So he spent what an average family of 4 people would have spent in 30 years, all in 1 year, on 28 flights, not even 1 year, 28 times, right? Because it was 28 flights. And so you have to beg the question, like, what did you order? Did you order the most expensive wines from the most exclusive places that the average person, not even Canadian, the average person in the world doesn't have access to? Okay, I'm just saying wine because I'm trying to understand, like, what's an expensive item? You can't say, it's ribeye and lobster, because that is not like $18,000 worth, right? And so, I brought up just wine because I'm trying to think, like, what item you consume would be really expensive. It would be champagne, it would be wine. Okay, let's say they don't drink because it's a work trip. So what did you order? Was there gold on your food? Like, I just don't know how to wrap my head around, from Ottawa to England, to Ottawa to London, we're talking about like maybe an 8-hour flight. Ottawa to Germany, we're talking about a 9-hour flight. Okay, in that 8-hour flight, what did you order for $18,000? And so I don't understand the math, and it actually worries me because it makes Prime Minister Justin Trudeau look conservative on his spending on in-flight food. So this is 1 year at the job. I guess we're going to see the itemized amounts of what it is. Listen, if the catering company for the Prime Minister's flight is charging an arm and a leg, maybe it's time to look at other vendors. I don't understand how this bill adds up, and if you guys have any idea, we'd love to hear from you on that.
Yeah, I think this will certainly more questions than we would expect, but I think let's go directly where our Prime Minister is, if we can find some answers over there. You've asked some very important questions here. We have, this is Why Media exclusive. We have Shubi right now, and the Montreal, where a Liberal convention is happening right now. We just heard Prime Minister Mark Carney give his speech. Shubi, a warm welcome on Why Media.
Thank you, sir. Can you guys hear me clearly? I'm here live in Ottawa, in Montreal, at the Liberal Convention 2026. How are things back there?
Yeah, you were about to say live in Ottawa. There's still some hangover from your Ottawa trip, or I know you're anticipating a trip to Ottawa after Montreal, so that's why you're about to say Ottawa. Anyways, so you're in Montreal. You spoke to so many leaders. If I could show a little bit of a glimpse first before we get on with our discussion. So here is a little bit of a glimpse. Y Media did a lot of exclusive interviews with many ministers, including Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne, including the Minister for Innovation, Evan Solman, our Minister to Combat Crime. She's the Secretary of State to Combat Crime, Ruby Sohota, and a host of other leaders. We will carry on discussing the speech that Prime Minister Mark Carney gave. Let's have a listen.
This is Shubi from Y Media Group, and Y Media Group is here live at the Liberal Convention 2026.
As a Canadian, you cannot feel more proud when you have the Prime Minister of India, which has, 1.4 billion people, quoting the speech of the Prime Minister of Canada and saying that the Prime Minister of Canada is setting the world agenda. I was with Prime Minister Carney, actually, we were next to each other like that.
Growing concern, that's for sure. That is why I'm in the role I'm in, because there are areas of crime where we've seen reduction. So it's important to set that, narrative correctly as well.
I'm Emma Harrison, the Member of Parliament for the riding of Peterborough.
Get on with their lives.
Party politics, what is happening in Canada right now, and what does the Party to do to continue to get the support of Canadians?
The days of our military sending 70 cents of every dollars to the United States are over.
The days of sending 70 cents of a dollar to US in defense spendings are over. Prime Minister Mark Carney made a very important statement, and he got a standing ovation for that. Prime Minister Mark Carney has made similar statements regarding US rupture, new order at the Davos summit. He got standing ovation there in the Davos summit, here at the Montreal Convention. Prime Minister Mark Carney making very important statement regarding US. He's once again getting standing ovation for that. Give us some sense, Shubi, what was the discussion there other than US? Please tell us what was the discussion regarding US, and if there are other topics. Please go ahead.
No, there were a variety of different policy discussions that took place here as well, whether we're talking about crime, whether we're talking about affordability, AI being one of the biggest topics that they're discussing here as well. But one thing that I can definitely say from experience, because I was here at the previous Liberal convention as well that took place in Ottawa last time, and you could see that there's a different narrative, a different focus that they had at that time. And the main focus at that time was rebuilding and coming up with electoral strategies at that time. But now, if we're looking at how things are now, especially with the MP crossing the floor right before the weekend and right before the Monday election the by-election that we're going to be having in 3 different areas, there is a sense where the party is now kind of talking more about how do we strategize, how do we kind of look at the long-term governance of Canada, and they're coming up with different strategies, different plays. So the atmosphere is a little bit different, as they've been saying as well. 4,500 people in attendance, which is a record-breaking for them. There's a lot. You can see that there's a lot of energy, a lot of excitement in the air as well, and especially after Prime Minister Mark Carney's speech, there was definitely a lot of discussions that are taking place here, whether it's on the different topics that he discussed throughout his speech as well.
Great. And we're also listening from you that yes, you were there in India. Prime Minister Mark Carney was there in India, and we also heard the Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne. So tell us the details, what he was talking about his India tour.
So regarding the India tour, one thing that we were talking about is global trade, right? And one thing that which Mark Carney also talked about in his speech was about buying Canadian. And that is something that the government has been pushing a lot, that we're going to be buying Canadian. And as Prime Minister Mark Carney said in his speech as well, is that whenever the government is looking to spend any money, they're going to be looking at the Canadian companies first. So the question that I had for the finance minister is that since we're pushing this, how are they going to be balancing the buying Canadian statement here with Canadian like nationalism? But you're also having to look at global trade agreements because, as you know, Prime Minister Mark Carney is going to many countries. He's just went to India, which Y Media was on the trip with him on. He went to Australia as well. He's been to China. So there's different trade agreements. So now, how are they going to strike that balance between the global trade and stuff? So there was a lot of discussions where even the finance minister was telling us where a lot of the discussions are being balanced between whether the global trade agreements that they're making are going to be with the ministers or with the.
Right. I think the liberals are quite confident right now. We're hearing different media reports. There could be as many as 8 MPs. They could be potentially crossing the floor. We recently heard there are 40 MPs who were saying this will Pierre Poilievre cost them the next election. Their seat could go. 40 MPs concerned about their seats. But now we have media reports suggesting 8 MPs who could be potentially crossing the floor. So 3 by-elections, floor crossing, Liberals shy of just 1 seat for majority. Very interesting political dynamics right now at Y Media Political Sensex. We are covering all this for you, and we have Shubhi live there. Ramonaji, 3 by-elections, 8 potential floor crossings. We've already seen 5. What do you make of all this?
Well, it's interesting because the latest one that crossed the floor, Marilyn Gladu, MP of Sarnia, she said that there was a statement. She said it's good for the country, it's good for my riding, and it's good for me. And then it makes you really think about what that means, is because she said, I've been elected since 2015, since Prime Minister Justin Trudeau won that election and Prime Minister Stephen Harper lost. She goes, in these 10 years, my constituents are asking me for funding. And essentially what she raised is a very important thing that I think us Canadians need to really take a look at. The government's funding comes from tax dollars. Tax dollars are charged, and then they decide how that money goes out and how they spend on programs that they campaign on. So in a case where a government is only spending, not only, but majority sending money for infrastructure and for certain projects and programs to key ridings where they have those seats, such as they have an MP from their party in those seats, and therefore they start making safe seats. That's how you would create a safe seat. You have an MP there, and then within every election they're able to do more for their constituents, and their constituents think, okay, well, if we keep electing this candidate, this MP, or their party, will continue getting the infrastructure, the needs that we have. So essentially, can you imagine, this is tax dollars coming from all of Canada, and to think that then those tax dollars are then being used in a way to position their own party and the strength of their party when it comes to specific seats is really what they're identifying, right? And this is what Marilyn Gladu was saying. She goes, because now I'm going to be part of a governing party, then I'm able to get some funding for my riding. So key indicator that of maybe the government needs to play fair. Maybe the Prime Minister, regardless of what party they come from, they tend to Canadians across the country, and making sure the distribution of money that goes to each places is based on the population. This is, I think, what Brampton's always been saying. Brampton's always saying, we have high population, yet we don't get the same level of funding. Top 10 big cities in Canada, but why don't we get the same level of funding when it comes to infrastructure, hospitals, and this and that and that? So those are excellent points to really take a look at. The other thing that this shows is that Mark Carney signaled that if you cross the floor, that you may get some sort of a position. And we've seen that happen with some of the MPs that crossed the floor. They went from, not being in government to having some sort of a very important, committee or position. So really, he's kind of doing this entire thing because, in the beginning of the year, we thought maybe we might go into a general election. We all thought it might happen to be able to, for him to get a majority. Now it seems like with the floor crossings, with who knows what he's promised them, and with that and these 3 by-elections that we'll know on Monday, it looks like we may not go, definitely won't go into an election, which is good for us, but it also gives him a majority, which he will not need the NDP support or the Green support to be able to do what he wants to. So that these are all massive changes, but you want to stay with us on Monday night when the polls close, and you'll see, in these 3 key ridings, who comes up the winner and what that means for this government.
Yeah. Prime Minister Mark Carney, in his speech, he's mentioned many things. He mentioned there at the Montreal Convention, Prime Minister Mark Carney says the building the economy. He spoke about women's rights as well. He also spoke in French about the floor crossing as well. So he's talked on quite a few issues. But at the end of the day, I think the headliner or the takeaway right now is in this weekend, there's a lot of discussion on the Montreal Convention that we are covering for you, but I think all eyes set on Monday's 3 by-elections. Former Mayor John Tory, he has endorsed Dolly Begum, the Liberal candidate for Scarborough Southwest. So the 2 ridings over here, University Rosedale and Scarborough Southwest, I think Liberals seem to be pretty comfortable there, but then you never know. We don't want to speculate anything before Monday. And then as far as the Quebec riding is concerned, again, we don't know, but it could be 3 clean sweep for the Liberals. It could be 2 out of 3, it could be 1 out of 3, or the clean sweep the other way around. What do you think?
That's to be known. I mean, usually a by-election is a report card on the government. And so if he wins these 3 seats, then it is a report card on his government of 1 year. We know that in Quebec, it's the Bloc is really putting up a fight. The Bloc has 22 seats, and they want to get a 23rd seat, so that'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what the Conservatives do maybe in Scarborough Southwest. We know University Rosedale is, in Toronto, and those are Liberal seats when it comes to, any level of government election. But Scarborough Southwest, which was Liberal in the last election, but it'll be interesting to see if there is any sort of movement there. Because we know that in this past election, the Conservative seats came out. Markham Unionville turned Conservative, but then he crossed the floor, and now he's a Liberal. But you have Richmond Hill North and Richmond Hill South, they turned Conservative. We have Melissa Lanceman in Vaughan. We have another one in another part of Vaughan, another Conservative MP. So you have these things. So let's see, Scarborough Southwest is, close to the York region line. So let's see if that is affected at all, if the Conservatives can pull a number. It's to be seen on Monday night. I know going ahead to this policy convention, the Prime Minister didn't really want to put out really big policy items. This is something that was mentioned. So less policy, it seems like, and more of a, team building momentum, because they welcomed Marilyn Gladue as the latest Liberal MP, and this is after them having every month somebody wanting to join them, and they just a little over a year ago they didn't think the Liberals were even going to form party, right? So this is a massive turn of events.
Yeah, it is a massive turn of events. One last question on the political sensex, and then we'll wrap up our Y Media foreign policy report. How does this reflect on the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre?
It's devastating, I think, for him, because you have him who was against Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He was a superstar, right? For 2 years, he was superstar on axe the carbon tax and those, really going hard, to the point where you had Justin Trudeau step down because his caucus felt like we're not going to win an election. A lot of them look like Anita Anand, who is a massive key player as our foreign secretary of state, foreign affairs minister. Yeah. She wasn't going to seek a re-election.
Yes,
right, and so massive change of events. You had Krista Freeland just quit on him and decide to finally, say, I was your number 2, now I want to be number 1. We saw how that turned out for her. But this was just, everybody believed this was going to be the Conservatives' comeback after 10 years of Liberal rule, and we know that the things that have happened. Listen, a government makes decisions. The leader really sets the agenda of where the party goes, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau set the agenda of where this country goes, and we're seeing the repercussions of that in many of our industries and what's really taken place and trying to clean that up. And so with the change of fortunes, with, you know, President Trump coming into place, putting a tariff in place, then you have Mark Carney, who was never a school board trustee or a councillor or a regional councillor or mayor or an MPP or a premier or a senator or anything in government other than a banker, a central banker of, you know, Bank of Canada and governor of Bank of Canada and England. Other than that, not a politician. So, you know, you have him come really, like, we knew the name, we didn't know the person. And really during the times of President Trump really taking a look at Canada and saying, you're going to be the 51st state and you really should join us and there's going to be tariffs and all the things that were coming out of the United States, the Canadians thought that, you know, who is best to represent us? And when you think of challenging economic times, you think of maybe a banker knows how to navigate in the economy and would understand the economy and would know what to do. So, you know, his numbers just went up. So every time during the campaign, when Trump would say something and he would respond or his ministers would go to Washington, D.C., the numbers went up for the Liberals. And then, of course, then there was that big meeting that he had, you know, just really positioning things. So what that meant for Pierre Poilievre was no longer, you know, axe the carbon tax was a thing, because the first thing Carney did as prime minister before the general election was to axe the carbon tax. So there goes a massive campaign, platform campaign policy for the Conservatives. And then you see Mark Carney coming up as what a prime minister should be to be able to combat what the Americans are saying to us. And then therefore Pierre Poilievre is not getting the same level of conversation, no news attention on him. And he's still talking about, you know, Trudeau era policies. Meanwhile, Mark Carney is, you know, the man of the hour in terms of responding to the president. And then he goes and wins a general election, also, you know, in a minority government. But then the question is begged of Pierre Poilievre. You know, you had a 26-point lead and you lost that election. The Liberals came down to a minority still. They stayed a minority, but then in that whole thing, you lost 4 of your MPs, and there's talks that there's going to be more MPs who might cross the floor. So what does that say? And then you also lost your own seat. You were an MP in Nepean, which is an Ottawa area riding, for 20 years, and you lost that to a Liberal. So even though he won the vote of the Conservative membership, you really need a high vote. At any time a Conservative leader loses a general election, there is a convention as a leadership review. He won that, but the only other way now is if caucus is really, if these reports of 40 MPs saying that they won't fare well in an election under him, if that happens, then caucus can vote him out. This is part of our system. If you recall, it happened to Aaron O'Toole. He went into a caucus meeting as the leader of the Conservatives, and then he came out not the leader anymore. Happened to Justin Trudeau. He was the prime minister, and really his caucus started revolting against him to the point he stepped down. So anything can happen.
Yeah, and you know what, at Y Media Newsroom, I'm going to share an important news. We've discussed this before as well, and that's on the front page of our midweek as well. Welcome to Y Media Newsroom. Recently, our colleague Shubi, he spoke to the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, and we did talk about Prime Minister Mark Carney's India tour and how was it interacting with Prime Minister Modi. And when is he ready to welcome the Indian Prime Minister Modi to Canada? We know that there is a huge delegation coming from India, and also the Indian Prime Minister Modi will be visiting Canada soon. So just have a listen when our colleague Shubi asked Prime Minister Mark Carney, when is the Indian Prime Minister Modi coming to Canada? Have a listen. And now
you can feel it everywhere here.
Quickly moving on to our next thing, and we have to wrap it up here. That's the Y Media Foreign Policy Report. I don't think so we have much time left. We will carry on this live coverage for you. But as much as we were seeing the late night discussions that are happening there, so but we are also witnessing a lot of statements. US has claimed that their warships, they were able to go through the Strait of Hormuz. That was a major claim by US. But here it is, we've heard Iran clearly claiming no. The entire Strait of Hormuz is controlled by Iran, and nobody can move around without their permission. So two very, very different statements from US and Iran as the talks are happening in Pakistan. What do you have to say? Very different statements.
You know, we learned about the term fake news from President Trump when he first got elected in his first term, and it just seems like, is it fake ceasefire? Is it fake agreement? Like, what's happening? You know, this is unheard of that you have a 40-day war and the only basis of a ceasefire is key specific things that they cannot, show that it's happening. One side is saying the Strait of Hormuz is open as one of the key indicators of the ceasefire, and the other side saying no, it's not. One side saying that Lebanon was part of the ceasefire agreements, that Israel should stop their occupation and bombing of southern Lebanon, and then the other side saying no, it's not. So it's very confusing, to say the least. If they're not aware to be on the same page, it's hard for us to analyze what it all means.
Yeah. So stay tuned with Y Media. Stay tuned with all the platforms of Y Media. We will carry on the live discussion of US-Iran talks in Pakistan. What's the role of India? Where does China sit in all this? Will Israel agree to a complete ceasefire? How does Russia act among all these discussions? There's lots to discuss. Stay tuned with Y Media on all our platforms. If you are in US, stay tuned with Channel Y US. Anywhere in Canada, Channel Y Canada on Rogers 857, Bell 828, TELUS 2418, Ignite 707. If you are in US, please watch Channel Y US on Sling. It's part of the Dish network. In case you're driving around, please stay tuned with Radio Y FM 105.9. I hope that's on your favorites. And in case you have an app, Y Media TV. That's our app, 24/7 Y Media TV. You can watch all the channels there. If you want 24/7 updated news in English from across the globe, Y Plus is your answer. So save in your favorites Y Plus. In case you have any issues, any questions, please feel free to call the Y Media hotline number, 416-475-5000. And before I let you go, once again, I want to highlight, do not forget to pick a copy of the biggest free English newspaper in Canada. Yes, Midweek is now the biggest free English newspaper in Canada. I'm going to show you a screenshot of our front page. So there are lots of things that we cover in Midweek newspaper. You will not get much of this coverage in any other newspapers. So here is the front page of Midweek newspaper that you are watching right now. At our front page, we have the discussions between our reporter Shubi and Prime Minister Mark Carney. There is an important discussion of Iran, US talks over there. Then there are so many other news on your right side, which you can see. So please do pick a copy of Midweek newspaper. There are 3 full sections. The main section, then the entertainment section, and then there's Y Media Business and Wealth Report. There's a huge 12-page colored lifestyle section as well, in case you're not interested in any news. Ramona ji, we will carry on the discussion. I won't say we're going to call it a wrap, but we will carry on the discussion. Always a pleasure talking to you, whether it's Y Media Foreign Policy Report or whether it's Y Media Political Sensex and Y Media Food for Thought as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting us into your home, and we'll make sure that we'll bring you the latest of this development. Thank you again.
Thank you. Stay tuned with all platforms of Y Media. Thank you.
Y Media. Y Media. Y Media.
Y Media.
Y Media.
Y Media.
Stay tuned with Y Media.
Y Media is a media company. With 360-degree approach in reaching the audience over 8 media platforms.